I often get the question, how do I break into the industry? First thing is that you have to work on your craft. You have to understand what it is that you're doing. You have to understand what it is that you want.
Hello folks, Richard Smitheman here. Welcome to the podcast. So today I'm having a conversation with character designer and illustrator Wouter Tulp. Wouter is one of the leading character designers working in animation today. I first had the pleasure of working with him about 10 years ago, and I was just so impressed with not only the quality of his work, but just how prolific he was. I also think that his Illustrator background brings something really unique to the character design process that you don't often see. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too. So without further ado, I bring you Wouter Tulp. Okay, so in my mind, you are one of the most unique and interesting character designers working today. I think that, and I want to kind of dig into your influences and why that is, why your style is, I think it's safe to say it is set apart from a lot of other character designers. You're from the...
Why do you think that is? I'm interested why you see it that way.
I'll tell you, well, one thing I think that sets you apart to some degree is the amount, and I was going to get into this later, but we can do it now, is the amount of story you bring into your designs. Like, you don't just do a character design, you're usually trying to tell a story with the design. And I think that's, you so often see character designers, they'll do a series of poses, but they don't seem to necessarily be reflecting story points in the script or saying something about the character other than the design of the character, if that makes sense. And I'm guessing some of that goes back to your days as an illustrator, where story and character are very intertwined in the image. But I'm curious, you're in the Netherlands. Where did you grow up there?
Yes. I grew up near Rotterdam.
Okay, and during your early years, then, so growing up, what were your influences?
Well, I don't consider myself that old, but it is the time way before the internet. And so I grew up in a small town where actually my dad was my biggest influence. He is well, at the time he was not working as an artist, but he is an artist, in his heart. And actually now he is retired retired. He is working as an artist now, but he was fired from his job, I think 10 years ago. And since then he thought, well, the kids have left the home. I'm going to do what I always wanted to do now. So he's a painter now. But at the time he was also, when he was out of work, it was always out of work. I mean, when he came back from work, he was always drawing, painting, sculpting, making music. And actually, we always did that in the house, on Sundays, my parents would set the table and a big chunk of clay would be thrown in the middle and everyone could grab some and create something, or we would make music together. So it was a very creative environment. And especially because my dad was an artist, he had books of Norman Rockwell or David Levine. So that was very influential to me. And then beside that, I didn't have a lot of influence. I had a subscription to a comic, a magazine that had a lot of different comics in it. And there was the library where they had a couple of books on art that I always gravitated towards. Other than that, there wasn't that much. It's not like the internet right now where you can find everything. And I think the limitation of it helped me to study it more thoroughly. The things that I saw, since there wasn't that much, I really tried to dissect, how does this work? What is it that I like about this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was having this conversation just the other day about, a similar type of thing. It was all pre-internet, and so you really had to kind of search for the resources. And I think, yeah, there's some value to that actually. Obviously, today with everything being so accessible, and which is in one way it is fantastic, but I don't regret the environment that I had to grow up in, and as far as really having to dig deep to find things. So I think it does add a lot to the experience. So your parents were really supportive of you becoming an artist, I'm guessing, yeah? It was never really in
Absolutely,
question.
yes. No. I feel when I speak to people, I always feel like I'm the exception because people often have these stories where their parents want them to be a lawyer or a doctor, or when they say they want to go to art school, having doubts. Are you sure you want to do this? You might not be able to get a job. And my parents, who were very supportive, in the sense that they also let me make my own mistakes. They were supportive and also thought, well, try it, and if it fails, figure out how you want to solve it. And they were a backup. They wouldn't let me fail in the sense that it would be really destructive, but they allowed me my freedom, and I really appreciated that because I'd never felt that pressure or expectation in that sense. And and for me, it was really, I think I was very naive. I just was very childlike in a way, I think, when I came out of high school, because I didn't really think about what it is that I wanted to do other than to draw. And I just heard about, someone said, well, maybe illustration is something for you. And I didn't even know what it was. What is it? And I said, well, you see these, in the supermarket, everywhere where you see a drawing, someone designed that. So, that's, or comics or whatever, you could do that. And okay, well, where can I do that? Well, you can go to art school. So can I draw there? Yes, you can draw there. Well, okay, then I'll do that. And I had no concept of life after that art school. I was just focused on, I want to draw every day. And this is a school, after high school where I had to learn physics and math and all that. Now there was this school where I could draw every day. I thought, well, let's do that. And we'll see what happens after that. I didn't even think about that.
The other thing that I think stands out with your work is, and especially, your personal work, is the diversity in medium you use, even down to subject matter. I would consider you as much a viz dev artist or an environment artist as a character designer. What kind of experimentation were you doing in art school? Like, apart from illustration, were you doing fine art? Were you doing figurative art, that type of thing?
Yeah, well, I always find it difficult to talk about art school because I don't want to give him too much credit. It really, it's mixed because I really had, I was there for 4 years, and it was really a great experience because I had the time to work on my art full time, and I had a lot of friends studying there as well. So that was really great. But the education itself didn't meet my expectation. I had a higher ambition than what they were teaching me there. And well, you're doing anatomy. We never had one anatomy lesson. They didn't teach us perspective. They didn't teach us color theory. So it was an education that was aimed at illustration, which is very specific, and at the same time, they treated it as if it was conceptual art. So it was all about the ideas, and they didn't give us any tools to realize those ideas. So that was very disappointing to me. And what I did, I think, mostly after school, when I started working as an illustrator, I took on most every job that I could because I just wanted to make a living. And since the Netherlands is so small, I just had to do any kind of job that came my way, which at the time was mostly children's books or caricatures at weddings, or illustrations for magazines or commercials. And because of that variety, I got to try out all kinds of different things. And I also used all those jobs to set certain challenges for myself. So with this job, I'm going to use ink, and with this job, I'm going to paint in gouache, but I can't use outlines, or all those kinds of things to learn the techniques, or learn different styles. And I think that the experience of actually working as an illustrator became even more, I think, my education than what I had learned in art school. Although I was working very hard in art school, and I was focused a lot on learning the techniques, even though the feedback wasn't always there.
Yeah, it's interesting. The idea of working in different medium, I think, once again, coming back to present day kind of ideas on learning and the way that we did it back then to some degree. The use of digital now as a learning platform, I see a lot of students that only seem to draw and paint digitally, and they learn that process digitally. I think there are some pitfalls to that approach. I think there's a lot to be said with working in traditional medium. Is that something that is that a challenge that you've seen with students as far as them only having experience working in a digital environment?
Yeah, it's really hard for me to really put myself in their shoes, because I really grew up on traditional, and for me that's it's so natural. And actually recently I've been doing a lot of ink drawings, and ink, there is no undo, and especially when you're working directly in ink, this is the mark you make, and you have to deal with it. And it makes you focus, or it makes you accept a mistake. And when there is an undo option, then I think that really changes the way you think. Or recently I was experimenting in Procreate, and they have this setting where your line gets streamlined. So if you want to draw a circle, it becomes this perfect circle because it adjusts after you drew it. And for me, that takes out something that I think is very personal. You know, the way you push a pencil on your paper, and within that stroke, you can press harder or softer, or change the angle of your pencil to get a different stroke. They try to mimic those effects, but it's never as subtle as, you know. It, in a way, you can think of it, you know, analog is if you have a line, you know, a curve, that's analog, that's the actual curve, and digital is just all these blocks mimicking the curve. And even though you make the blocks really small, it misses some information. So for me, yeah, I cannot think of not using traditional as a medium. At the same time, for production, I think it's so useful because you can work really fast. And it's something that I don't have a clear answer to. You know, could you learn only using digital? I think you can, as long as you really want to learn the craft. If you use it as well, especially now with AI, if you just use it to push a button and get a result, what is it that you have learned? What is it that you understand? And if you are curious and really want to understand how things work, why this color versus this color has a certain effect, I think it shouldn't make a difference. But there is something to it being tactile, and the happy accidents that you get in traditional, that for example, in digital, you have to use a lot of different brushes to get a certain effect, where if you have an actual brush, you can just, have dry paint, or you have unlimited kinds of effects with just one brush. So I think it has a richness to it that it's hard to actually mimic. But maybe it's so hard. I don't want to sound old-fashioned or bash digital, because I think there's a lot of valid, it's a valid medium as well.
It's interesting. You mentioned obviously for production, the ability to revise and to turn things around quickly is really important. But do you, in any part of your production process, do you actually use traditional medium, or do you pretty much try and stick to working in a digital environment for the client?
It depends. Whenever I can, I try to also work traditionally, but often the speed of things makes me go to digital, just because of a client wants the result now, and it's just faster than scanning it and then adjusting it. But it's interesting, because the result I get when I draw traditionally or digitally is just different. I get a different drawing. So, and I think there is, with creativity, you want to allow as many possibilities in a certain stage of the process to get a result that is matching the project. And so if you have a process that always leads to the same kind of result, you want to open that up and try something different. Draw with your left hand and see what happens. Or so drawing traditionally or with a different medium can open up the possibilities and help you to get a better result. So that's why I always try to include it, especially in the early stages of the process.
I have no doubt in my mind that, at least for me, my process is different. My thought process is absolutely different when I'm drawing traditionally versus digitally. And I'm not sure, I can't quite put my finger on what that is, that X factor of why. But is it the tactile response of the pencil against the paper? Is it that inability or knowing that undo is not just an unlimited kind of option? I'm not sure, but it's an interesting thing,
It's also funny when you say the option to undo, because actually I really love, especially lately, I love the mistakes. The fact that we can see that, you tried to draw that hand a couple of times and we can see still some marks that are off. When you see a Glen Keane drawing, you see, that line over and over again, and it has so much energy. And for some reason, there is this idea with a lot of students, I think, that a finished drawing is a drawing that is rendered to the point where it looks as it's still from a Pixar movie. And when you think of Ralph Steadman or Ronald Searle, those are finished drawings too, and you can see the stains and the marks that are off, And to me, that has so much expression. It doesn't need to look that rendered to be a finished drawing. So it opens up the question, do you even need an undo button? Maybe you can just keep on drawing until it's good and leave the process. And a lot of people say this, I love my sketches, but when I'm finishing the drawing, it becomes all stiff. And I think that also has to do with the idea that it has to be stiff in a way. It has to look a certain way.
I see it all the time in animation when you go from the rough animation to the cleanup. And while the cleanup is, maybe it's on some level, it's bringing another level of refinement. For me, the most charming animation ever done was when the cleanup was done directly over the animator's rough, and then they Xeroxed that. Yes. You look at Jungle Book or any of the Xerox era kind of animated films, and the animation just has a deeper sense of kind of energy and life to it that
Yes.
the modern stuff, as beautiful as technically it's executed and all of that, it just doesn't quite maintain that raw
Yeah.
energy that the animators put in the original first pass. It's a shame in our pursuit for excellence, we actually end up kind of robbing
Yeah.
ourselves of this beautiful part of the process.
Yes, perfection is also boring, and I always love it when you have some ability to fill in the rest of the drawing in your mind where someone hasn't, force fed you the entire thing. And for example, with the latest Spider-Verse movie, there's this character that is from the punk era. And so they created this style that is kind of a collage. You see all newspapers and stuff. It's really rough, and some frames are missing when he moves, and because it's imperfect, that it's so appealing because it has such a character to it. Because they didn't try to make it look perfect, and I think that's why it's so successful.
Yeah, for sure. Just want to jump back a little bit. So you're doing illustration mostly around the Netherlands, I'm guessing, yeah?
Yes, at that time the internet, I think Google didn't even exist, Facebook didn't even exist. So for me, working meant taking my portfolio, which was a big file with actual drawings, and traveling the country, going to newspapers and magazines and publishers, just showing my work. And I had this way of I would just go to the library and look at magazines and find the phone number of the art director of a magazine that I liked, and I would call them up and make an appointment, and I would travel there. And I learned that a lot of newspapers and magazines had their offices in the same building. So I had this one appointment, but then after I showed my portfolio there, I would, accidentally get lost in that building on another floor and walk in the what's it called, the editors of another magazine, and while I'm here, can I show you my work? And so that's how I try to make sure people knew that I existed.
I did the same thing, walking around London as a 15-year-old, literally cold calling on animation studio doors. And I think between my age and just being slightly naive, I actually got to talk to a lot of directors because they kind of probably had a bit of sympathy for me or appreciated my hustle. But it's what you had to do, there was really kind of no other option, right? Like we didn't have the internet, we didn't have email, we didn't you'd get a list of, like, I was actually speaking to someone about this the other day, but we had an animation supply house in London called Chromacolor. And they had a list of studios. They would have a pretty current list of studios. You get that list, and then I would walk around London. I remember even one time my dad's like, you know what, presentation's everything. You need to wear a suit. So I literally put on a suit, and I'm calling on, people are answering the door in jeans and T-shirt. They must have thought I would look ridiculous. But, I didn't know anything.
I would do the same thing when I would send out my portfolio. I had these small printed versions of my portfolio, and I would have a red, slightly transparent envelope, so that when you would see that in the mail, it's red, so it stands out, but it's slightly transparent, so you can already see there's something special in there. All those things you try to do to stand out. I even saw that a couple of years ago at CTN. There was this table where people could leave their business cards, and it was this pile of business cards. And I thought, well, if you really want to stand out, you would have to create a business card that's shaped like a ball or something, because it's the only business card that's different. I think in a way, you need to look for ways to stand out. And, I think maybe younger people may listen to this interview, and, I don't want them thinking, that was long ago, and what does it have to do with me? Because I often get the question, how do I break into the industry? And there is no, if I ask you, how you did this, it's different than what I did. And I think everyone has their different way of making sure to find their place. But I think for me, what has not changed is to make sure that you put your work out there. No, first thing is that you have to work on your craft. You have to understand what it is that you're doing. You have to understand what it is that you want, learn about pipelines so you can direct your portfolio exactly to the needs of a project. So when an art director or production designer sees your work, they can see how it would fit a production, and that it's because often people say, I want to be a character designer, and you see the portfolio and it shows everything, children's books, illustration, portraits, life drawings, and especially in an industry that's so that has all these compartments, these specialisms of jobs. You want to make sure which is the job that you're applying for. But then what hasn't changed is the kind of audacity maybe to just show your work to people. No, don't be afraid to put your work out there. The worst thing that can happen is that they're not interested, and even better would be that they give you feedback, what you need to work on. But at least make sure that, and in this day and age, it may be not physically going to a studio, but sending in your work or meeting with recruiters on events, all those things that you can do now. Post your work online, and take part in communities, contests, everything. But that's basically the thing. You have to constantly keep showing your work, learning what you need to improve, and make connections with people, honest connections. I don't believe it's, I want to meet this person because they can give me a job. But if you can create genuine connections, then it's something that goes back and forth. When you are at a certain point, you can hand a certain job to someone else if you don't have the time. It has to be an honest thing, I think. If it's the other thing that I would say is try to think of it in terms of what do I have to offer instead of what do I want from this person, because then it also doesn't feel as bad when they're not interested, because you still know what you have to offer. It's just something that they don't need at this point, because some people can get so disheartened by rejection. And if you work on what you want to do and just focus, you're not so dependent on what someone else does with it. It's easy to say in hindsight, I worked on this and this and this, and those are your successes. But those are just the projects that were interested, and a more honest way of showing a resume would be showing all the projects also that were not interested.
And also the process that built up to even getting that project or establishing those relationships. I think that's such a good point, is your intention going in, because I think that it can be pretty overwhelming. And I can imagine as a young student starting out now, and they go to, a seminar or a lecture that, says, you've got to get yourself out there and you've got to network and that. But it's understanding what that actually really means. Right. Yeah. So it's so easy to hear that and think that by, okay, I'm going to post every day to Instagram and I can check that box. But that's not a meaningful interaction with anyone at the end of the day. Especially when you're trying to establish yourself. And also back to what you said is, how do you actually stand out? And on Instagram, that's very difficult. This wall of noise. And just even this is kind of going down a slightly different route, but I've been thinking a lot about Instagram, just kind of even as a platform. The fact that we've all kind of signed off on this idea that we're going to present our work on this tiny little screen, that you can't even zoom in without, as soon as you let your fingers off the screen, it collapses back to the size it was. it's got to arguably be one of the worst ways to show your artwork, and yet it's the main platform for getting
I agree,
exposure out
because
there.
some time ago there used to be these platforms, which were forums, which were much more effective because you had these topics that if you were interested, that's where you could go and post your work and have a conversation with other people about that. And they may still exist, but it's not as much alive as they were. And I think those were much more effective, I think,
Well,
because it,
100%. When I started out, it was like my first kind of, I'd say, online presence was having one of those blogspot
yes,
pages, and everyone had them. And you'd
yes,
have the links to the people that were either friends or that you admired, and people would do the same. But at least in that platform, you could click on an image, it would open in a new window, you could
yes,
zoom in, and you could really look at the art. It's like, I was on your website just the other day, just having a good look at it. And the work it opens up in a way that it just, once again, it reiterates the point of just how limiting a platform like
yeah,
Instagram is. And yet for some people, it's their only way of exposing themselves.
that's right.
I think as long as people are looking at art on their phones, maybe this is the reality that we have to live with.
If you're talking about original art, physical art, traditional art, then there's something to that for me digital has never matched. Seeing an original painting, knowing that the artist really was close to this actual surface, putting the paint on there. It's this pigment that he mixed, and now is this wonderful result. That is something that is so special to me. And also doing it myself, creating a work of art. I really love the idea at the end of the day, looking on my table, that there is this drawing that I can pick up. I can hold it, and if it's digital, when I turn off my computer, it's nowhere. I love that sketchbook or the stack of drawings, as opposed to a folder that has files in it. For me, that's just not as charming.
I couldn't agree more. And I actually even found, and this maybe is kind of interesting, going back to the character design process, and what you could really, the iteration process, which, there was a period of time I worked a lot with just markers and ink. And if I had a drawing that I thought was even something that resonated with me, even in a little way, I would usually cut it out. And in my old studio, I had one of a huge, like 6 or 7 foot by 4 foot, like pinboard, basically. And
Yes.
I would cut it out and I would put it up, and to be able to stand back and just take it all in, and it would help kind of with the thought process, and it could generate new ideas, and it was just to be able to see it all globally in one place. And I've got bridge, I've got different ways of viewing multiple images at the same time, but it's not the same. There's even something to be said for just having them up on the wall and walking by them and just subconsciously glancing at something.
Yes.
And it triggering an idea. It even brings me one step further. When I started in animation, one of the things that was so magical was going into an animation studio and seeing all the BGs. They would inevitably be hung on the wall, like either in sequence or just as somewhere to put them, kind of thing. And, you go into the ink and paint department, and there'd be stacks of little 2 mil pots of cell paint, and they were like little towers, like that surrounded the ink and paint artists, and it was such a magical time. And you go into an animation studio now, and unless they've gone to effort to print things out and put them on the wall, it can be an incredibly sterile environment. It's just
an office.
a lot of Cintiqs, and it's such a shame. There was such a magic walking into an animation studio when it was still analog.
Yeah.
And I feel like we've kind of lost something in our attempt to kind of evolve and progress. We've actually robbed ourselves of something that I think was really important.
Yeah. And at the same time, I can totally understand because it's such an insane amount of work that has to be done that the digital medium can make so much easier and faster, especially animation, because in illustration, if it's just one drawing, that is an overseeable amount of work. With animation, so many parts have to work together that just take a lot of time. Um, from a production point of view, I can completely understand. That's why they would make
Oh,
that
for
decision.
sure, for sure. But yeah, it doesn't take away from the fact that it's. I feel like we've lost something along the way. I don't. Have you ever seen that photo of Don Bluth? He's basically, I don't know if he's leaning against it or he's standing next to it, but there's a pile of animation paper. It's got to be 5-6 feet high, and they were like, "Oh, this is like 5 minutes of animation." And I guess it was for some promo thing, but it is like even down to, storing all the artwork for an entire feature film. That's a massive undertaking.
Yes.
I don't even know. I'd love to know where studios like DreamWorks. I know Disney has vaults. And they have the vaults. I think they have a couple in Burbank, and then I think they've got vaults like in old salt mines out in Utah or something like that. Someone's going to correct me, but it's something along those lines where they have these massive kind of caverns where they've stored a lot of the artwork.
Wow.
Because there's no humidity. I guess the temperature's constant and that type of
Yes.
thing. So
Wow.
it makes sense, but you just wonder to what end. Like, there were drawings I did like, for DreamWorks back in the 90s. Where are those drawings now?
Yeah.
Are they in a landfill? Or are they actually being stored somewhere? And to what end? Like you're never going to use them again. So do you store them? Do you go to the expense of storing them? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one.
That's right. Yes.
So you're working in illustration. Was animation on your radar at all? Were you thinking about animation? Did you care about animation or?
It wasn't on my radar at all. It just didn't exist in the Netherlands. Well, there were some. How do you say this? Some studios that did commercials, but I wasn't aware of them, and so for me, it didn't even exist. Beside, of course, the movies that I saw, the Disney movies, and I was just amazed by them. It's funny because I was very little when my neighbor took me to the movie theater. It was the first time. I think must have been 5 years old. I think they took me to the movie theater to saw I know the Dutch name. I'm thinking of the Black Cauldron, considered by many as a really bad movie, but I had never been in a movie theater, and it was so overwhelming, and I was blown away, and because of that experience, I just considered it a great movie. But so that really was something that stuck with me, that it's possible to make these drawings move, and but I had no idea that people would actually make these movies, and I think I was working as an illustrator for about 10 years when I saw the Art of book, the Monsters Inc. Art of book. That was actually the first time I realized people actually made these movies. That's already digital, but the Art of book was still all traditional concept art. I remember there were drawings of Nico Marley in there, and that blew me away because they were like illustrations, but they were rough and playful. There was so much joy in these drawings, just exploring stuff. And I thought, well, this is what I want to do. But at the same time, my connections were within the Netherlands. I had no idea. America was extremely far away. I had no idea how to make a connection there. And then Harold Sieperman, he was working on a German feature at the time. He was a character designer on Mulan and on Tarzan. He lived in Germany when he did that. He would fax his drawings at the time. And he was working on a German feature. Oh, actually, before that, there was a Dutch 2D animated feature that was in production. It was the first Dutch feature in 30 years, I think. And they asked me to do a couple of character designs. I'm skipping things because even before that, I saw first I saw this Monsters Inc. book, and I thought, this is what I want to do. And I was doing a lot of children's books at the time, and I thought, well, just like I had done my my other jobs, setting these challenges to learn something, I thought, well, I'm just going to treat these children's books as if I'm working on a movie, because no one had explained to me what character design was or how it worked. I just had this book, and I thought, well, just going to do what I think is concept art. And I started posting these drawings, and they were seen by someone creating this Dutch feature, and they asked me to do some character designs for their movie. And these and that was really a nice experience, but still I had no idea what I was doing, just what I thought was character design at the time. But those drawings got noticed by Harold Sieperman, who was doing a movie in Germany. And because he was a former Disney artist, he was able to really educate me, tell me about pipeline, how these movies are made, what's important in character design, shape, language, all of that. I actually got to work with him in Germany for a short while, where he was really mentoring me. So that was a great experience. And then Peter de Sève came to the Netherlands for a lecture at an art school in the Netherlands. And I met him there, and I showed him my work, showed what I was doing. And then he said, well, your work is great, but it's a lot of caricatures. I just showed him all the stuff that I was doing. And he said, if you want to be in character design, you should really create a portfolio that shows I'm a character designer. And then he said, they're setting up this event in Burbank called CTN, and I think you should go there and show your work there. And that's what I did. And I didn't go there just that time, but I started going every year so that people would get to know me, because I still believe, even though the world has changed, meeting someone face to face is so much different than sending an email with pretty pictures. And so I started going there year after year. And just as at the beginning of my career, things didn't take off right away. It took some time before I landed my first job after art school. Actually, it took 2 years, because a lot of people, they liked my work, but they were already working with illustrators, and so they're not going to fire those or not use them anymore, and hire a student who just came out of art school. So it took a while and persistence to get the opportunity to land that first job. And the same thing happened with movies. I think, if I remember correctly, it was David Coleman at the time who didn't have time for a project, and who was so kind to mention my name. And so that was the first very small pitch project that I worked on. But it was my first little toe in the door.
That's great.
And then from there on, it's still, it's not like from then on my phone kept ringing or something. It's on and off, but it was the first time gradually, I kept sending my work and all of those things. Gradually making.
What year was that then, roughly?
I think 2012.
Okay. Wow. So one of the things that really blew me away when I had that opportunity to see your process and to see your work was the speed that you work at. I was absolutely amazed at how fast you could turn things around. Like, I remember, like, we would.
Oh, really?
You would get an assignment.
Don't give people the idea.
The following day, there'd be like 9 different versions of something, and it was just like, what's that process like for you? Like, when you get a script, and also you're working in the constraints of a production where obviously there does need to be quick turnaround, but What's that process like for you? Like, as far as, okay, you read the script, then what?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think at the time I was just starting. I was just super scared. You know, they're paying me for my standards a lot of money, so I need to do as much as possible. I think that was also part of that process at the time. Uh, but I get the script, I read the script, and then I think a lot of time it starts with first putting down the ideas that initially come to mind. These can be words or drawings, um, and and then also finding references based on that. So the way I work is really I'm associating a lot with, for example, someone who is um, an introvert. You know, then I can look for references. I don't know if this is something that would give you good results, but as an example, I could just Google introvert and see what I get. But I would also associate in a more indirect way. You know, for example, an introvert would maybe be someone who would be, you know, putting his jacket and doesn't want to be seen. And then I think, well, that could be like a turtle. And then I look for turtles and see what happens. And maybe I can use something that of that animal in my character. And so I try to divert from the direct thought process to things that are, I'm looking for metaphors. That's basically what it is. And so from that, I start to try and make connections. And then in the process of designing the characters, I think, as you mentioned before, I always try to think of situations. For me, it's funny actually that character design became a separate profession, because in my mind it cannot be seen separate from all the other process, all the other things that are needed to make the movie, to even, you know, lighting, everything, music. So I also try to think, what would the voice of this character sound like? How would he move? Even if I'm not animating, I'm trying to think, does he have a limp? Or, you know, does he, if he walks, does he go with his nose first? Or is he, you know, really very much like an actor would think of his role, I think. Part of my process often is also taking a walk, because I found that, you know, walk for me, I think people have different things, but for me, when I walk, I'm physically in movement, and it does something where I get a lot of ideas when I'm walking. So I take a notebook with me, and I walk, and a lot of things come to mind, and very often just one walk gives me ideas for the rest of the week, that I just can draw out those ideas. And so, yeah, I think mostly thinking of situations that these characters in, and doesn't mean that it's writing a whole script in my mind. It can be as simple as, you know, this character enters the room where the other character is. How does he feel? How does he react? Is he surprised? Is it someone he hasn't seen for a long time? What does that do to his body? You know, is there tension in his body, or is he relaxed? Is he joyful or scared? So I'm really trying to get into the mind of this character, but then and this that's why I like when you said I'm not just a character designer, but also a phys dev artist. For me, I try always to think beyond just designing the character alone. And maybe that's more what a production designer would do, but it's just what I always try to think of, you know, what would the color script of this movie be, or what kind of mood would this be? How could we tell this story? And it doesn't mean that this has to be used in the movie, but it gives suggestions to the director that helps them tell the story, because they don't know when they start out exactly, you know, all the details of what it's going to be. They have their their big idea, but they're making use of all these artists to form that idea.
I think, yeah, character designer, viz dev artist, but also story artist. Because as I said in the beginning, I think one of the things I love about your work is the character designs are giving you kind of like a snapshot of a moment in time that could potentially be in the film. And I remember the very first time I saw your work, there were just so many ideas that go beyond just character design, right? Or actually, maybe they don't go beyond character design. They are maybe to some degree the essence of a character design. Because what is a character design? It's not just about the clothes they're wearing or their general overall form. It's who is this character? What's their backstory? What's their history? What's behind the scenes, kind of thing. And I think that's what I really. And I do think that it's not that it doesn't. There aren't other artists doing that, but I think that your work just really exudes that kind of sensibility. And I do think that, because I remember like even just, I think there were environments that you did for us that were just like storytelling in their own right, putting the characters in an environment. And I think possibly as a character designer, maybe that's really good advice for a young artist, is study story as much as anything.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, I would. I write also. Not in the sense that these are movies that are being made or that this is being published, but just to understand what it actually is that I'm working for. These are because the writers of these movies, they are doing the same thing, only they use words, and the words are not the movie. And my designs are not the movie. We're all having a different way of expression, but it's all part of telling the same story. So it has to tie in with one another. And in some cases, a house can be a character in a movie as well. So it's really important to understand how stories can be told and how you can. What I love best is finding unique ways of telling that story. At a certain point, I was working on characters that I divided one character. I'm not going into the entire story, but I think I can safely say this. I took one character and I divided him into three characters. This was kind of an abstract story, and these were three different characters that all had a color, and if they would be in front of one another, they were kind of transparent. Those colors would mix and they would become white. So they with each other they could create different kind of color harmonies. And I didn't come up with that just because I wanted to do that visually, but it said something about how these characters interacted. They were not complete when they were separate, and when they were together, they would feel complete. So, that is a way of coming up with an idea that visually describes what the story needs. And I think that's one of the important tasks of a character designer, to come up with visual solutions for something that is written in words in the character description, for example.
I'm guessing, how often do you have like the voice of the actor? Because I'm guessing that would really help also inform and kind of push in a direction. Or would you rather even potentially not want to know who the voice was voicing the character? Would there be any benefit to that?
No, well, both happens. It can help, but I don't often have an actor actually, the recording of an actor. But what often happens is that we're thinking of this actor for this role, and he would sound like this character in this movie, for example, so that you have a reference. But a lot of times it's something that I think of when it becomes part of the discussion.
Looks like a lot of thought goes into also even just down to the colors used for the character design process. not only a character in isolation, but a lineup of characters? Is there color? Is there the correct amount of color harmony, or do we, we have the right colors for the villain as opposed to the, the other characters, the hero or whatever? But I've noticed in your character designs, there seems to be a great emphasis put on color as well. And I'm not sure every character designer does that. I know a lot of character designers only work, with line. They let a color stylist or whatever dictate the character, the color palette. Do you find that even the color choices can help inform creative choices on what you do with the character?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. It may not be the first thing in general, the first thing that I would think of. But for example, the thing I just told, that's where an idea is really about the colors. So then that becomes a really important thing in designing these characters. But it's really a great example where you can see that a character design is not a thing on its own, and it's really part of the entire story, because you cannot design the colors for a character without considering the rest of the colors of the movie and the scene. So, and I really like that part where you're working with a production designer and discussing, how do we want to create this atmosphere or this mood or this feeling with these characters, and how can we express that in the clothing or in the colors of the skin or whatever you're doing with the colors. Can be textures as well.
And texture, yeah, especially obviously with CG. When you're working on a feature, in your experience, like how many other characters designers would there generally be, or would you get a chance to just take a first pass on all the characters in the film, or how does that usually break down?
It's different for each project. I often work on movies at the very beginning, so I often am the only character designer working with one writer and a director, for example. But then as the project continues, more character designers are also working. Sometimes I don't even know how many other, because I always work from home. So I don't always know. It depends. Some studios invite me to group meetings. And for me, those are the best productions, not just because I like it, but also because I think you would get the best result if you have the whole team working together instead of dividing them up and just giving them separate tasks and then piecing those things together. I think it would work much better if I know also even what the composer is doing, what he's trying to achieve, and trying to match that. So that happens, but it also happens where, I don't even know how many other character designers are there. And sometimes other character designers are working on the same characters because they just want to see the different takes of different designers.
A point's got to come, though, in a production where someone's got to match someone else's style, right? At the end of the day, if you've got 3 or 4 character designers working on a film, the director is most likely going to gravitate towards a particular artist's style and look for the film. How do you find dealing with that? As far as do you find yourself in situations where they say, "We love your designs. This person did this with it. Can you get your stuff more into that kind of design style?" Is that something that you come across?
Not so often. As I mentioned, I often work at very early beginnings, blue sky stages of a project. So at that stage, it often doesn't matter so much, but it does happen. And it's funny because I actually do this myself. I mentioned Harold Smitheman earlier. Last week, I was actually doing a lot of studies based on his designs, just trying to figure out what is it that makes his drawings so appealing, or what is it that he does that makes it so look like he did those drawings, or, he has a way of emphasizing certain lines and leaving other lines very thin, creates a very strong effect in the design. So I like this, already. So it's not something that I walk away from, because I'm just interested in understanding why a certain design is, why it has a certain style to it. It's something that can be very hard to grasp, and it's really cool when you figure out this is what makes this design look unique, and this is kind of a language that we can use for other characters as well.
So how does your time get divided as far as, because you post as much stuff, as much personal work as stuff that may have been production work, or possibly more, actually. I probably see more of your own personal projects than anything else, at least on social media. But
yes, I'm not allowed to share most of the work I do.
Sure. But the point being is you're a very active artist outside of just the commercial work. It's not like, you're done with a job and you don't pick up the pencil again until the next job. But how do you find a balance between personal projects, passion projects, and then commercial work? Like, what does that day look like for you?
I'm still figuring out how that works for me. But
you're very successful at it. That's why I say, because well, I know a lot of people they work on a project and it's all consuming for like 3-6 months or whatever. And then, they get burnout and they don't want to work on their own stuff, or it's really hard to kind of find the motivation. You seem to be just always at it. And I'm just curious about how that happens,
Well, for me, drawing for myself is really something I do to recharge. It's my own space where I get energy from. So it's hard for me not to do it. I get really agitated if I wouldn't draw for a couple of days. So it's something that I just need for myself to channel, frustrations or anything. It's also something that I just enjoy so much because I think I'm very curious. So I have an idea and I just want to try things out. I'm also very eager to learn, so I do a lot of studies. It's something I really enjoy, so I don't have to force myself to do studies. It's just something that I feel I really love to see myself grow in a certain skill, or so that's why I do that. And to find a balance, I have those projects that can be all consuming, and then I just do a couple of drawings in between for myself. But the way it works is also that I do have times in between projects where I can draw all day. But I learned that there has to be some kind of balance. Doing only commercial work or only personal work is not working so well for me, because if I have too much time off and I'm just doing personal stuff, I have also too much time to start thinking, who am I as an artist? What does this mean? Shouldn't I be doing this or this? And it really works well for me if my personal work can be a reaction to not having been able to do something for myself for a while.
I'm guessing you have situations where someone says, design this character. You design something that you're really pleased with, right? And you hand it in and you're really confident. You're like, yeah, they're going to love this. And then they come back and go, no, it's not what we're looking for. That's got to be a bit of a gut punch in a way. Like, how do you process that? How do you reset? And how do you deal with kind of like that internal angst of dealing with that process creatively?
I learned for myself very early on, working for movies, that it's not my movie that I'm working on. So, and I really love the process of coming up with those ideas. And although I can think this would be the best solution, it's not going to be my decision. It's not my movie. So, and I learned to focus on not giving them the idea that I think is the idea. That's what I'm doing, but my focus is really on giving options. So, and it's also a thing maybe that is limiting me to do personal projects like for example, a comic book, because if I start doing that, my mind always goes like, oh, but this could also be cool. Oh, this could also be cool. And so I have a great mind for a concept artist, because when I turn that idea in that I think is a great idea, I already think, this could be cool too. So even if they don't like it, I'm already thinking of the next thing. And for me, the joy is really in coming up with all these ideas and giving them options. And I'm not so much married to my ideas because I always think there must be a better idea. There's probably, it feels like there are a million ideas and I only gave them 3. So I should be working more to find that better idea. So I don't really have that problem, I think.
That's great. That's a really good mindset, because I'm guilty of it, to be honest. I sometimes I've done something that I'm convinced this is the path. This is the way, and then you don't get the reception you're expecting, and very hard to sometimes to regather yourself and say, okay, they are ultimately, it's their project.
Yes,
they do get to call the shots, but it can, the thing is, though, I think that it would be completely understandable as an artist to get emotionally invested in your work and to want to fight to champion for it.
I'm not saying I'm not doing that, because if I believe it's a good idea, I will mention it and I will push it. Usually I give it 2 tries. I say why I think this is a good idea, and then they say why they don't. I try once more, and if they then say, this is it, I just leave it, because it's no use trying to, it will be annoying to them if I hold on to that. But I just want to let them know why I think it's important. But then if they don't, it's just the new reality, and I'll see it. I always see it as a new challenge. These are the parameters. Within these boundaries, I have to come up with a solution, and then when I get the feedback, basically what they're doing is they're slightly changing the parameters. These are the new boundaries that you have, because this part that you designed does not fit what we want. So these are the new parameters, and I just see it as a new assignment, a new challenge, and I just love that process. Okay, if this is the challenge, what can we do to make this the best solution? Because and I have had the experience where I personally felt, well, I think this is not the best solution, or I would have loved if they would have done this with this movie. But again, it's just a waste of energy, because that's not up to me.
You just need to move on. Yeah.
Yes.
How much teaching do you do these days?
It's schoolism. That's basically the teaching that I do. And I start my day doing the feedback videos for some of the students. And after, that's basically how my day looks. I started with, I think, half an hour to an hour of feedback. And then the rest of the day I work on the project that I'm on.
So you try and be pretty regimented with your time as far as getting that out of the way first, and then you focus on whatever project that it is that you're working on.
Yes. Well, usually before that, I do some warm-up drawings, some life drawings or stuff like that, anatomy studies. Or
are you pretty conscientious about that? On it, like, consider it like going to the gym.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
So you'll get up and you'll literally just sit down and just, you allow yourself a certain amount of time each morning to do warm-up drawings. Yeah.
Yes.
That's such fantastic advice. Really, well, it really is, because I think that especially when you get on productions, it's so easy. Like, so many people, the first thing they do is they start reading and answering emails, right? Yeah. And so you're immediately then in business mindset, and you're thinking about what you've got to do for the client for the day.
Yes,
and I love the idea. I've got to adopt that.
Well, and I also have learned that it doesn't have to be, a long time. It's even better to do 10 minutes each day, so that it's I do a little longer than 10 minutes, but let's say you have 10 minutes. That's an amount of time that, if you don't have 10 minutes to to just do some sketches, then I think there's something wrong with your time management. And so, but it would be better to do that every day. So you create this this pattern, this consistency of, every day your mind goes to, life drawing, for example. That really helps to make it a part of your system, rather than doing it once a month for 3 hours. Because you want to make it a habit, I think, or at least I do.
Yeah, I think consistency is everything in that respect when it comes to practice. And I think even more importantly as a student, when you're trying to develop a skill set, to get consistent daily practice, as you said, 10 minutes once a day is much better than even 3 hours once a week in a single session. Yeah. But I also find it, like, because I have the same kind of thing with music, daily practice and that. And there are some days I sit down and I don't really want to, I don't feel like practicing. So I trick myself. I say, okay, I'm going to practice for 10 minutes. But yes. I know that once I sit down and I start practicing, it will inevitably go minimum half an hour, probably longer. But even today, and I've been doing it for years, and I still will let myself go through the trick of when I'm not feeling it. Oh, well, I'll just practice for 10 minutes. And I just tell myself that. And inevitably it goes longer. And I enjoy it. It's basically giving the muse an opportunity to meet you, Yes. And I think that was a really kind of interesting thought process of just, if you don't sit down and do that, you're not allowing the universe to interact with you and give you that opportunity to do that. Yeah.
For me also, there are periods where I do a little less, but I know that I pick up the habit. So, if you go for a run every day and you miss a day, then that's not the end of the world. You just missed a day, you pick up. And I think for this is the same thing. Even if you skip a week, because it's not something where you're focusing on the result, but you're focusing on the act of doing it. So if you make sure to have some kind of habit in that, and then when you go on a vacation or you have a period where it's really busy, you say, well, for 3 weeks I will just focus on something else. That's also, I also alternate between, sometimes I do a week of life drawings, then a week of anatomy, then a week of animal drawings, or some characters from my mind. So I just have that time scheduled, and I can pick certain things that I want to study, so that I can focus on the thing that at that time I'm inspired to do. So I am studying, I am warming up, but I don't have to force myself to do something that my mindset is not ready for at that time.
So if you've decided it's an anatomy week, and you wake up and you don't feel like drawing anatomy, will you just force yourself to draw anatomy, or will you go, no, I'm going to do character design today?
I think in most cases I will do anatomy.
That's great. That's good discipline. You've got 6 different courses on Schoolism, right?
Yes.
That's I was just taking a look at them. Like, some of them are really long.
Yes.
Like, that's going to be a major undertaking. What's that process like?
To create the course?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a massive undertaking. Those are the workout courses. So that means that instead of a course where I explain theory in a lesson, do examples, and you get an assignment, these are courses where it's shorter. So it's about 30 minutes. And for 9 weeks, you draw along with me. I still explain things at the beginning, but it's more like basically exactly, the warm-ups, so that you make a habit of things. What I have learned with a lot of the courses is that, for example, dimensional drawing. In every course that's about character design, I touch on dimensional drawing, but within those courses, you spend time explaining it, but that doesn't mean someone immediately gets it or is able to do it. And so these workout courses are there to spend time on such a subject longer and have exercises each day that are focused much more on the act of practicing, developing the skill. And so that's why they are this long. So you can turn it into a habit and really make that skill something that a skill that you have, instead of just hearing someone talk about it and then you suddenly have to do it in one exercise.
You mentioned dimensional drawing. So we're talking about drawing volumetrically. That's
Yes.
really what we're discussing. Is that something that you find students are struggling with a lot? Is the idea of understanding, rather than drawing a series of shapes, they're trying to draw, in a structured way?
Yeah, one of the things students struggle with most, I think, to understand, we are creating the illusion of depth on a two-dimensional canvas, and you do that with line, or you do that with shading, with perspective. There are overlaps, there are all these kind of tricks that we have, and especially keeping the perspective consistent. What I see a lot is people drawing a character, but then the top part of the body seems like the point of view is up here, and the bottom part of the body is drawn as if we're looking at it from below, and that's mixed within one drawing. So the illusion of perspective falls apart, or drawing the same character from different angles, drawing the face in different expressions from different angles. People find it really hard to keep that character consistent. So I just created these workout series based on dimensional drawings to help people develop that skill.
It seems to be a common theme. I see it a lot in the figure drawing too. One of my teachers actually put it very well, which was, as we develop as artists, we become shape aware before we become volume aware. And I think that really kind of struck with me, because there is a tendency for someone starting out to just see a series of shapes and to want to copy a series of shapes and not understand the relationship between them. And it's a tough nut to crack, because what you really have to do is to get them to start thinking volumetrically.
Yes.
You kind of have to undo a lot of bad habits to get back to kind of a baseline that you can then build good habits on. And inevitably, they're going to go through a really rough patch, as far as, in their mind at least, the quality of their drawing going down as they're developing a sense of how to draw. It's a tough one, and I've heard it said, a number of times now, that this seems to be the common issue. I wonder why that is. It's from a psychological point of view that so many students, this seems to be the one of the main challenges. But then on top of that, you've got, not only do you need to then learn how to draw volumetrically, but then bringing character and expression volumetrically, because volumetrically tends to stiffen up the drawing.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
It was one of the things that took, for me at least, kind of took years to kind of undo was, I don't know if you remember the Walter Foster animation books from, I think they were from the 40s or the 50s. And there were a series of very thin pamphlet-like books done by the Walter Foster Publishing Company. And they were based on animation. And it was the thing of, you start with a ball, then you start with a bean for the body, or whatever it might be. So they're going through the process correctly, thinking volumetrically. But then it's finding that balance also then to be thinking gesturally.
Yes.
Right, which is really ultimately the first stage of the drawing, whereas you want to find the essence and the energy of the pose.
Yes.
But then putting volume on top of that will tend to stiffen the drawing back down. And so there's a lot. Drawing's hard, man.
It is. Yes. Yes. I have this course that is called Fundamentals of Expressive Character Design. And that's exactly what you are talking about, where you are combining volumes and gesture. That's the after drawing volumetrically, that's the next step, basically, to add the gesture. And drawings tend to get stiff if we focus on the volumes alone, because what you're doing when you do that is really in a systematical way, thinking, well, this is the top plane, this is the side plane, this arm is attached like this, and it comes towards me. And what you're doing then is you're thinking of the parts. And when you are drawing gesture, you're basically connecting the parts. That's bringing unity to the design. And when you're drawing the parts, you're drawing, the hand and the lower arm and the upper arm. When you're drawing gesture, you're basically drawing a verb. You're drawing reaching or grabbing something, and thinking of it like that. Often the gesture lines or the tension, if I have my arm like this, this is the lower arm, the upper arm. But when I draw the gesture, that's often an ongoing line that goes over two parts of the body, instead of when you're drawing the separate parts, you're just drawing and it stops there and then begins there. So you're separating the different parts of the body, which can make it look really stiff. Now, the hardest thing, I think, with gesture is that what also happens is that shapes tend to change, especially when you go in really cartoon style, squash and stretch. You have when you finally are able to draw this same character from different angles and you can keep the shapes consistent, now suddenly we're adding gesture to it, and the character stretches and squashes. And how can I make it look like it's still the same character when all the shapes completely change? That's a challenge for a lot of people, and that really has to do with understanding, the force that is applied to that character. So, for example, I always compare it with a water balloon. If that has a certain shape, a certain volume, and I can squash it in the middle and it becomes really thin, the part that's in my hand, but the parts that stick out, they're stretched, but the volume inside still is the same. So if you can understand how the force applied is, so if your character stretches, you need to apply that force to every part of the design. If you leave out a certain part, or you for example, you make the body longer because it stretches, but you keep the same width, then you're changing the design of the character. You're not changing the force upon that design. You're changing the entire character. So you have to think about all those things at the same time, and it takes time to learn how that works.
It's really it's a fascinating subject, and I find, because I usually start with gesture, and then we'll build volume on top of gesture. But it's a funny thing, because I think of gesture kind of, we're kind of stripping down everything, right? And kind of the way I was still told, it was like, think of it kind of like poetry, using as fewer words as possible to say the most amount. Right? But you can only do that after you've gone through the process of understanding grammar and understanding sentence structure. So it's the way I put it is, you've got to draw complicated before you can draw simple, right? And gesture's kind of a refinement of drawing in a complicated way. It's a way of simplifying that down. But it's also tricky, because at the gesture stage you're also going to be looking at measurement. So while you're trying to be loose, it's also the stage where you're actually making some very critical decisions on overall measurement. And I also think something to the point that you just made, which I think is also really interesting, is, you can take a Warner Brothers kind of character, which can be very elastic in some way, but I still think it's possible to stretch those types of characters too far. There is a point where it can become too much. So even though you are dealing with a character you could pull apart in some way, even that can be overdone.
Yes.
And it's finding that sensibility and finding the sweet spot of, I can push this far, but you go beyond that point and now you've broken the idea.
Yeah, and that even depends on the language that you choose for that cartoon. If all your characters stretch in a very extreme way all the time, then that becomes the normal, and you can get away with much more than if you have a limited kind of squash and stretch happening all the time. Or in realism, it's even, I think in realism, people tend to stiffen up also, where I think you can apply those principles much more because you accept, if you see the face of a boxer getting hit in the face and you see that in slow motion, you see a lot of, squash and stretch happening in real life, and in drawing you can get away with even more while it still looks realistic, I think.
I say it all the time with figure drawing is, I think one of the reasons you see so much stiff figure drawing is because the artist is trying to make an accurate representation of what's in front of them. And I always, when I'm at that gestural stage, if a character's tilting this much, or a person, I'll tilt them just a little bit more at that gestural stage. If the axis between the hips and the shoulders is so much, push it another 5-10% in the gestural stage, because inevitably when you do add the volume, it's going to stiffen it up a little.
Yes.
And by pushing it more in the gestural stage, by the time you've added volume and anatomy and tone and all of that, it kind of settles back down. And you end up with something that is probably closer to the initial pose or whatever, but you've managed to maintain the life in the drawing.
Yes.
And I think that's something at least for me, when I understood that and I kind of was able to get that in my work, it was kind of like a relief, because it was like, okay, now we can really play.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's interesting when you say trying to create this actual representation of what they see, because what is that? You can focus on the shading, you can draw it in line. There is no actual representation. By definition, it's an interpretation of what you see. So if that's what it is, then you might as well take that interpretation and communicate that as clear as possible. And if that means pushing those relationships between those angles a little bit to make that clearer, then that only helps to communicate what it is that you observe as an artist. I think that's where it becomes interesting, that it's not, we already have the model, but it's your interpretation of that model that becomes interesting. And I think for me, that's the next step. You have the understanding the dimensions, the gesture, then you have the combination of those. But on top of that, you have design. It's really where do you put the emphasis? Do you want to blur some areas to create a focal point here and there? Or, for example, you can also, these are kind of systems that we use, thinking dimensionally. But you can also choose to have areas where you flatten things out, or where you don't even draw, or where you just use an outline. There are no rules. These are just principles that you can use, and then to take the next step and to become completely in charge and decide, well, this is how I want to draw this. I think is something that you can do when you understand all those principles.
It's really fascinating, and I'm just looking at your page now on schoolism. There seems to be some fantastic subjects there, so I would really encourage people to go check that stuff out. I somewhat hesitate on maybe getting into this next subject, but I'm curious to get everyone's opinion right now, because it's such a big topic, which is AI. Obviously, we're in a really kind of weird space right now, trying to collect our thoughts as artists on all the different aspects of this. Whether, even putting aside the fact that there are artists that need to be compensated for the data scraping that's been going on, and the moral and ethical side of that, which I think is one thing. But then there's the reality of this coming into the mainstream, and it's going to become part of people's process and workflow. I'm imagining, especially for those coming up now. I personally would be terrified if I was a student paying $60,000 a year to go to some art school and seeing what AI is coming up with now. I'd be like, this would be pretty terrifying. have you had any experience with it yet? Is it something that you've played with, or is it something that you have, what are your thoughts on it?
I think it's really hard to I have a lot of thoughts that contradict one another sometimes. I don't really know. Well, in general, for me, it feels like something I'm not interested in, because I like the journey, and I don't want a button that takes the journey. It feels like having a button that, it's like it's summer vacation. Now you have a button and someone does the vacation for you. You don't have to go on the plane. I don't go on a vacation to make it to the plane back. I want the experience of that vacation. That's what AI feels like to me. Like it's this button, and every moment of a drawing is a moment where you can make a decision, where you can reflect, why do I want to express this in this way? You can search, and it feels like something that doesn't make sense to me. And I think it's strange that in a way, let me see if I can put this into words, but for me, a lot of the discussion is about what I see is about AI can now do this and it can replace us. But for me to compare that as equals is really mind-blowing, because what you're seeing is only the outside layer of something that looks like something, which is nothing. And if you have an artist, like Andrew Wyeth, for example, his art is not just that painting. It's his life, it's his experiences, his craft, and he went through so much in his life to express himself in a certain way, and to reduce that to a robot generating, arranging pixels in a way that have similar colors or matching a certain style feels so ridiculous to even take that seriously as a comparison. And also the question, more philosophical question, why do we tell stories? Why do we make art? For me, it has a lot to do with communicating what I experience. When I see something, we're all in this world. We're born and we have a life, and art is a way to connect, where we can feel I'm not completely alone. This person also experiences this. It can also have a way of informing, tigers are dangerous, it just simple things like that, or teaching life lessons. And to reduce that to a button that creates a series of images, and not even to see what it means to make art, for me feels just, I don't even understand it. Then there is the world that we live in, where we have businesses creating stuff from their point of view. If you're just interested in making money, then I understand. Now you have a button that you can press, and it can create, more images than the artist could do in a year, in a very short amount of time. And if you can make money with it, if that's the criterion, not what the images are, but if the criterion is, can we make money? And if people pay to see a movie that was AI generated, or parts of it, then probably that will be enough for them to make the decision to use AI, because then you are not so much concerned with what artists are interested in. And actually, a thought that I had recently is maybe I don't have anything to say against it, because when I decided to become a commercial artist, I decided to be part of that system where, what I create is being sold. So and it belongs to someone else. So if that other person now finds another way of selling his product, then that might just be the reality that we live in. But it also means that for me, that's not what I'm interested in. Maybe I should accept that if it changes in that direction, that's not the place where I belong anymore. And in a way, the world has changed throughout my career a couple of times already. And I never set out to be a character designer as a final result. This is what I need to be. It's very much similar to how I went to art school. You know, I want to draw. I want to express myself through drawing. And I'm looking for the place where I can do that and where I can feel most joyful doing that. And right now, this is in movies. And if the world changes, then I might have to find another place where I can do this. Something like that.
I think that's beautifully put. And I want to end on that note, because I think that's a really kind of optimistic way, a framework to look at it. Wouter, thank you so much for doing this. You're welcome. It's been fascinating. I've learned a lot. And as I said at the get-go, I'm just a huge admirer of your work. And I love what you do. And thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. It really was my pleasure. Thank you for having me on this interview. And it was a pleasure talking to you.